Welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me today is Tayla Cannon. Tayla is a physiotherapist, and today her and I are going to be discussing her company, Athletic Rebuild, and the current state of physiotherapy in the States and how, an online virtual-based approach offers a whole lot of other things that you don't get at your typical PT clinic. So we cover a lot of little different rabbit holes as we go throughout this episode today, from the state of healthcare being reactive instead of proactive, and so much more. This is a really great chat, and I really appreciate Tayla, and I highly recommend you check out everything that she is doing. I also want to give a huge shout out to Isophit, our season 5 sponsor. Isophit is my go-to for all things isometric training. For more on them, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Tayla, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
For people who might not be familiar with you, or maybe they haven't heard of Athletic Rebuild and all the amazing things you're doing, especially in the online space, would you mind filling me in a little bit about who you are and all that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Tayla Cannon. As you can hear, I'm not an American. I'm actually from Australia. I moved here about a year and a half ago now. I'm a physiotherapist, same thing as a physical therapist, same thing, different words. Um, and yeah, I started my online physiotherapy company about 6 months ago now. And just as any physical therapist would, I am treating people, taking them out of pain, treating them for injuries. And with the ability of working virtually, I treat people worldwide. A little background to me too. While I am a physical therapist, I'm also here in America working in cardiovascular clinical research as well. So busy girl, but love what I do.
How did you get involved in cardiovascular research? Because that's kind of a unorthodox path for a physiotherapist, I feel.
That it is. Yeah. So funny story. I moved here to America to work as a physical therapist, working in spinal cord injury actually. And should have been red flags from the start. They didn't have me be licensed in the state of Texas. So there was some shady things going on to have me working there. And I came to learn a lot more about the business as I got there, and it certainly didn't align with my values. So when I left, I was in a bit of a pickle because I wasn't licensed here in America to practice. So my options were go back home or work this out and find a different career. And prior to my physiotherapy degree, I worked in clinical research and did biomedical science. So I was like, okay, maybe I could step into like the research medical device realm. And yeah, I stepped into this worldwide clinical trial for a transcatheter device. So we're treating people with a specific type of heart failure. So totally different to physical therapy, but also utilizes my knowledge. But in saying that, it's broadened my horizons and really opened my eyes to the power of us in our role and changing people's perspective on movement and health and exercise. Because these people that I'm working with in this clinical research realm, we're going in and we're creating structural changes to their heart. But if they just exercised, they wouldn't need any of this. So that's where I think us as PTs can really make a difference and stop people getting to that end of the spectrum.
I think it's so interesting that you bring that up because a lot of times we think about exercise and we think about like the muscular system, right? Everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants bigger muscles, everyone wants, bigger ass, tighter abs, and so on that way.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to it than just what we can see, right? There's all that underlying physiological component. In your case, we're talking about the cardiovascular system. It's so easy to forget about that whole concept of heart health. And then you start
Mm-hmm.
looking at the stats and it's like, wow, this is actually a major problem for America. Like, even
Mm.
people that we think are healthy are not healthy from a cardiovascular standpoint. So it's really interesting to have that kind of understanding that, exercise and movement are essential, yet what we are doing is not currently working. And we have this big heart health issue or cardiovascular health issue in the country, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's an incredible unmet clinical need for heart failure. We have 26 million patients worldwide with heart failure. Yeah,
That's
it's
crazy.
insane. And America itself, it's scary. The health world here in America, it's quite backwards. I'm sure many can agree. But yeah, you're right. Like we look at fitness as this aesthetic, social, fun thing to look good. but there's so much more to it. And I don't think people understand the gravity that just movement and exercise holds to our life. It's so much more than I think the stereotype that it has.
Yeah, I completely agree. And not to mention too, I've, known some different people who trade, short-term improvement in the looks for long-term health through different
Mm.
substances and different things that way. And it's just one of those things, it's like, to me, it's more about, the APTA mission statement is literally transforming society by optimizing movement. And we certainly can
Mm.
do that through movement. It's just a matter of we have to promote movement in a healthy and meaningful and impactful way, and not so much a more, like, for lack of a better way to put it, toxic way.
And I think as you say that too comes to mind, we live in this world right now where everybody wants the quick fix. We're all about how can I get what I want fast? So everyone opts for the easy options. And to put in the context of what I do, you know, people will rather go and have a heart surgery than step foot into the gym, because the heart surgery is a step in, come out, supposedly feel better, rather than step into a gym and commit for a number of months until I feel better. And, it's the same thing, I think, with physiotherapy too. People come to us and expect to be fixed in one appointment. And then we get the stereotype of physios don't work because we got an hour chance to try and fix what a problem that probably needs 3 months. So I think we need to change that, like the stereotype of this world isn't a world of quick fixes. That is not your answer.
Yeah,
But
we have to
how?
shift the mindset and the mainframe. And it's so interesting to bring that up on the surgery versus the, fitness approach in this sense, because I think once you cut into something, it never really returns to the state it was in beforehand, right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
if we're doing a surgery, especially an invasive one, like something in the heart, like if we're cracking full chest open, like, there's shoulder restrictions, there might be some incision site pain in the chest, not to mention the fact that someone literally just, did surgery on your heart of all things. Like that sounds a little bit risky to me. I'm not a cardiologist myself, but I imagine that any kind of surgery on the heart would carry some more risks than going to the gym and working on your fitness. And not to mention, you brought up such a great point on the physio side of things as well. You're absolutely right. So many people come to us for the quick fix, the immediate fix, and we have to create buy-in on day one if you're treating people in person. And if you can't create that quote unquote buy-in, you might never see them again, right? So, being able to make things feel good is essential, but it's really the long-term things that move the needle forward. And that's where I really love and appreciate what you do from an online standpoint, because I feel like that solves so many issues, right? You can really
Mm.
provide whatever kind of service your patients need. You're not really confined to, hey, insurance said we have 10 visits. We've got to, make the most of these 10 visits and see where we can get you. You can really take people through that whole transformative process of getting them to fall in love with movement and exercise and really turn their life around through that.
Oh yeah. And I am so grateful that I guess I took that risk and I stepped into what I thought was a risky move, because everyone has this idea of, physiotherapy or physical therapy, you go and get a massage. How do you do this virtually? I'm like, one, I'm not a massage therapist, and don't freaking ask me for one. But two, that's not what we do. And as I've obviously grown in this company and come to, trial and error and what works and what doesn't, I've come to learn the big faults in our system. And I think the number one fault in the system is that we have too much knowledge for a 45-minute, 60-minute appointment to convince somebody that we can make a change, but they need to commit to us for, a long time, right? And I think the system too fails us in the sense that we only have control over our patient for 1 hour. Realistically, we need to have control over our patient consistently for a number of months. We need to know more than what's happening in that 1 hour. We need to know what their training is like the following day, the next day, that whole week. How are they sleeping? How are they eating? You can't do that. And you cannot have any say in that when you only see them, once every 2 weeks for an hour. So having the ability to touch base with my clients whenever I need and whenever they need has been a game changer, because they can come to me and say, hey, I've woken up, big flare up, don't know what to do. And then I can say, hey, let's do this instead. So rather than them waiting for their next appointment that might be in 2 weeks' time, they're back in the gym that day. So that's, shortening their recovery time frame and still getting them to where they need to be, just in a different way.
Yeah, I absolutely love that approach. And, to that point, so much changes on the day to day, right?
Mm,
Especially, your company, I believe it's called Athletic Rebuild. And
mhm,
to me, that kind of assumes some type of athletic or active individual is kind of the client base. And when you're athletic or active, one day you feel great, the next day you might not, right? Like
mm,
today, I woke up and I had like real bad right sided lower back pain. I'm freaking 26 years old. I shouldn't wake up with lower back pain,
mm,
right? So what did I
mhm,
do? I modify what I did in the gym, worked around it, still got a great workout in, just kind of modified it a little bit based on how I feel. But if you don't have the knowledge and skill set to understand what's going on, what you should do about it, and then how to proceed accordingly, then you're right. You're stuck in limbo for 2 weeks, just waiting for, hey, I need to figure out what to do. And in that 2 weeks, I think the research is pretty clear. We can lose a pretty notable amount of strength if we don't do anything for 2 weeks. So,
mm.
we mentioned earlier that there's a bit of a health problem or a health crisis rather in America, and our ability to keep people moving reduces that. So the worse we do at that part of our job, the worse the worse the bigger picture of health crisis is going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you touched on a point too, how everything is variable with us, and it's very much load based, volume based. And that's what I'm coming to learn too is, we say we have an injury and we say it's because we're weak here or we're weak there. When realistically, the injury exists because we overloaded. It's all about what you're doing and how much you're doing. It, absolutely, technique comes in, absolutely, strength comes in, absolutely, mobility comes in. But realistically, irrespective of that, you either did too much or you're not doing enough. That is why you are in pain right now. And if we cannot manage what someone is doing on a day to day basis, they're just going to continue doing what they've always done. And it's just going to keep recurring. And it's just, this endless cycle. So until we step in and break the cycle and manage on a day to day basis, I truly don't think people can truly overcome those chronic, long standing injuries.
I like how you said it's either too much or not enough, right? It's either
Mm,
too much force goes into one area or not enough force goes into a certain area. And,
mm,
with that understanding, I feel like, at least for myself, from a practice standpoint, I've lately seen more people doing too much than
mm.
not enough. And it can be really, really difficult, at least for me, to convince some people that, hey, the best thing for you right now is to actually slow down and rest a little bit instead of push more.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I face this all the time. And it's funny you say that too, because I had this thought this morning. I think a big flaw in like the fitness industry now is that it's turned into this performance hype type of world. High intensity group training is the thing. And with that comes, like lift more, move more, keep moving, don't rest. And we're getting stuck in this, like, and it's exciting and it's fun, but it's not good for people that have never stepped foot into fitness before, and with that comes lack of time. So they typically don't have good warm ups, they typically have no rest, and they typically don't have time to address people's form. Now, there's the debate of, bad form, good form, does it really matter? Look, maybe it doesn't, but it probably does when you're doing 150 reps in 10 minutes. And then that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing these people come through and they're doing these group training, and, to them, they're like, but I'm just doing like 3 classes a week. I'm like, yeah, but when do you rest? Like, there's just, people cannot see the bigger picture and what's going on right now. And I think that's a big flaw in our fitness industry at the moment. There's a big push for quantity rather than quality.
Exactly. It's always a matter of more. What more can I
Yep.
do? What more do I need to add on to this, right? Like, oh, I rolled my ankle playing soccer or field hockey or whatever the other day. What more do I need to do to get this right? I'm already doing the ice, the elevation, the ankle pumps. What more do I need to do? It's always a matter of layering more and more on, and there gets to a point where it's, just a little too much to the system.
Hmm.
I think that the pharmaceutical industry actually does a great job of looking at what we call the therapeutic window. right?
Mm,
If we give a certain amount, we start to get a good response or the response that we're after. If we give too much, we start to get bad side effects that we don't want. So we have to stay in between the two, enough to get adaptation, but not too much to the point of getting unintended side effects. And I think
mm.
that the more we look at fitness that way, the better off we do as providers and the better off the people that we serve are going to do as well. We need to do enough to keep moving forward, but not so much that we start to cause some of those other side effects.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that is relevant too to, fitness trainers and personal trainers in general too. It's understanding the minimally effective dose. You know, we're better off playing with the minimally effective dose than the maximally effective dose. We're finding that lower end of the spectrum and pushing for that rather than trying to just fill with volume and things and doing more. Because, I see so often in the gym that, it's just lift more, lift more. And sometimes I'm like, I'm in a deload week. I don't need to lift more right now. But it's that understanding we need to like shift the mindset of less is sometimes better.
I love that you brought up the deload week there because I think we live in an era, and maybe I'm guilty of it as well myself from an online standpoint, where it's just everything is a highlight reel. So you go on
Mm,
Instagram and someone's always hitting a new PR on Instagram, right? Or some crazy workout or something like that. And it seems like all these other people never take time off and they're just constantly pushing forward and progressing more and more and more. And then we ourselves start to think that's the way we need to be, right? Like, I always need to
mm,
be pushing more. I always need to be doing more. And then we kind of forget that sometimes people take a rest, right? Like, sometimes people
mhm,
actually take a day off, or, they sleep in a little bit, or they get a little extra food a certain day. But that kind of stuff never shows up on social media, so the
mm.
general public never really sees those things, right? Or, we watch someone who's at that quote unquote elite performance level, and we forget that, their supplements are dialed in, their sleep is dialed in, they've got stress management, they eat, sleep, and breathe for human performance. They're not necessarily someone who's working an 8 to 10 hour day every day in, like, typical American job that way.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought up social media too, because I think that's skewed so much in terms of people's perspective on movement, physiotherapy, and all the likes. You know, it's funny because to gain attention in the social media world, typically people like to see different things. Like, oh, that's different. I've never seen that before. I like that. And I post lots of different movements. But in saying that, realistically, yeah, sure, I do all of that stuff, but I still do all the basic fundamental things too. And people forget that. People see all the cool things and like, oh, I need to do that. I need to do this. I'm like, no, maybe you just need to learn how to do a lunge. It's just pulling back all of this craziness that you see on social media these days and understanding that, sure, that person might be doing those really cool things. They may be doing things backwards, upside down, but they're probably still squatting, lunging, overhead pressing, all the basic things too. And that's enough. That's all we need. The functional, the technical stuff comes in honestly when you just want to mix things up.
Yeah, no, I love that you bring that up. And I certainly think that there's certain things that we can do from an exercise standpoint that are, what I like to call the big rocks in the jar of life, right? Like, if you have a glass jar and you fill it with rocks or sand, if you put your
Mm,
big rocks in first and then you pour sand in, it'll kind of go around and fill the whole thing. If you put your sand in first, all those little cool, Instagram sexy exercises, you put those in there first, and then you try and fit your big rocks in, it's not going to work. So
yep.
essentially, we have to focus on those big fundamental type things that way. How do you go about balancing that yourself in the online world, since most of your business is online or virtual based? How do you go about balancing, my business is online with, there's some trends online that I just don't want to be a part of?
Good question. And it's funny because I do have people reach out to me and they're like, oh, I love how like you posted that and it's really different. I'm always having the conversation and saying, yeah, like it is cool and it is different, but for you, I don't think you need that. You don't even know how to do this, low level basic thing, and I want to establish those foundations first. So a lot of it, and speaking with people, it's educating and relaying the foundations and, changing their perspective. But then I guess when it comes to posting, gosh, social media is hard. There's always somebody that's got something to say. And I can spend so much time being very intentional with every single word that I use, but there's always just one word and one person that takes it out of context, right? So obviously, yeah, I put a lot of thought into what message do I want to portray here. It's easy to get stuck into the trends and, what's going well right now and what are people posting about. But I'm still very selective in what I choose to follow and what I choose not to follow, because there are a lot of trends that I don't agree with, right? And it's just, yeah, it's a hard world, social media. Really
It
hard.
really is. It really is. I love your point on the trends too, because, if we think back historically, there's a time when high sugar diet was considered healthy. And now we look at that and we kind of laugh and think, man, what were we thinking? But
Mm-hmm.
same thing from an online standpoint, right? Like once you post something, it's kind of there forever, right? Someone can always screenshot it or something that way. So it's like, if you buy full-heartedly into one of these trends, make sure you really firmly believe it as one of your core training or, guiding philosophies behind what you do, because that's going to stick with you forever.
Mm.
And I certainly think it's something that can evolve and change over time, right? Like the way I
Yep,
work with people now is very different than what I did a year ago. So
absolutely.
there's always evolving traits that way, but what we do from a like core philosophical standpoint and why we do it, for me anyways, that hasn't changed a ton, right? Like I do
Mm-hmm.
things from a PT standpoint and in the online world to have positive impact on other people. That's the guiding principle here, period.
Yep,
And that's not going to
absolutely.
change just because someone online is like, hey, it's the trendy thing to do PT to make, billions of dollars. PT's
Mm.
not like that lucrative of a field. We'll be honest here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I certainly think that it's essential to have that. And the other thing I was thinking too, as we were talking is, people might go online, they might go to your Instagram page that way and go, oh my gosh, I'm hurting or I've got pain. I need to, work with Tayla because she's great with working with people online and getting that better. But I think as you mentioned earlier, we need to almost reframe the way we think about PT. We don't have to be the ones that just treat pain. Like you could come to
Mm.
us before you're even in pain and say, hey, look, what am I doing right now that could set me up for failure in 5 years or 10 years, right? Like, could we
Yeah.
actually switch our approach to be a little bit more proactive instead of just being reactive all the time?
100%. And that's, yeah, the conversation I've had many times recently too, because, we are looked as the rehab specialist, but what about prehab specialists too? There's so much knowledge that we have that others don't, that we can share to prevent them from needing us in the rehab realm later on, right? And I guess that's where I kind of shifted the way that I provided my services too. I was originally, very much geared towards persistent, ongoing pain, and I'd take the rehab route and take those clients. But then I had a lot of people coming to me and was just like, hey, I see what you do, and I don't do those things, and I feel that that would be good for me. Can you help? And I was like, wow. One, I'm very encouraged that there's people out there that want to step in and use me to better themselves prior to being injured. So then I was like, okay, how do I do this for these people? How can I do it in a meaningful way that isn't just me being a trainer, right? So I was like, okay, how about I run them through everything that I would do just as I would with a paying client? Take a subjective, tell me about your training, tell me about your life. What is your goals? What are you trying to achieve? What is it that you feel you're lacking? What do you want out of your training? What do you enjoy? And then from there, run them through a full body assessment. So mobility, unilateral strength testing, evaluate their form in compound lifts if that's what they're doing. And then, put the pieces together. What do I find? What can I see? What troubles are they having? What do they want to achieve? And kind of come together and either just guide them and say, hey, I think you're missing this in your training, or I think this would be good for you, or hey, you're lacking this. Let's incorporate that. And again, every person is different. So there's not a one size fits all for people. And I think that's what people need to learn in every aspect of physiotherapy. But yeah, definitely shifting the perspective and the mindset of what a PT is, and making people realize that we can help them before they're in pain too.
Yeah, definitely. It's a personalized, individualized approach, and you don't have to be in pain to seek that out. On top of that, as well, you kind of mentioned that originally it sounds like you were treating a lot more pain. I don't know about you, but I think treating pain is so complex. Everyone's
Hmm.
pain is a little bit different. I can't feel what they feel. Depending on how long it's been going on, there's research to suggest that pain literally changes the way our brain works and how our
Yep.
neurologic system is actually wired. So it really becomes every patient is a case study, and N equals one every single time of trying to figure out what initially happened, how we got to where we are today, and what we have to do to kind of rewire how our brain looks at movement, right? It's a lot
Yes.
easier for us when someone is, maybe a month after injury, or maybe injury has not occurred at all, to encourage movement into different planes or different positions and so on that way. It's a lot more difficult if we're 20, 30 years of pain, longer than I've been alive in some cases, and we have to try and figure out how to, move that needle back to where we wanted it to be. And oh, by the way, as you mentioned earlier, we're constantly under pressure to get that result in like an hour or two,
Mm.
which it's kind of hard to
Mm.
solve 30 years of issues in an hour, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Pain is so complex, so interesting. I am so passionate about persistent pain because I think it is very different to your classic acute injuries, in that I think there is a huge neurological and psychological element that we forget about. And as you said before, our brain wiring changes when pain persists. So the way our body or our brain interprets things that are going on in our body is dysfunctional. It's not telling us the right thing. So it's almost a matter of, to me, I find that if someone's been in pain for that long, work out what they've been doing because it's clearly not working, and try something entirely new. And I find doing something entirely new means that they don't have the brain wiring attached to those movements because they've never done it before. For example, it's like, oh, I can't lunge, haven't been able to lunge in 10 years. It's too painful. It's really bad for my knee. It's probably not bad for your knee, but your brain has told you that that's a painful movement pattern, so you can never do it. So, how can we replicate, I guess, the biomechanics of that in what your brain doesn't recognize as a lunge, and see if we can get you doing it that way? And typically, you find that they can do these things pain free, and they don't realize they're doing exactly what they've said is painful for the past 15 years. But it's all brain. It's all about changing, perspective, mindset, the view of things rather than actually mechanically changing things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, that's very similar to the approach I use. I treat a lot of patients who have undergone ACL surgery, and
Mm-hmm.
typically you're taking a quad or a patellar tendon surgically, and that lunge position that you mentioned becomes awfully painful early on. It's very difficult to get the knee forward because, we kind of just surgically induced tendinopathy. And I just kind of found that if I have people get to that point where it's just a little bit uncomfortable, and then we just ISO hold it there, and we just
Mm-hmm.
hang out there for a little while. Not, it doesn't take long before we're actually moving the knee a little further forward, and then a little further forward, and we're getting a little bit lower, and so on that way, right? It really
Mm-hmm.
is remarkable to see just where someone is at the first time we ever do it versus where they can get to after just a few weeks. So I certainly love that approach, and I love your point too on psychological and other components kind of feeding into what we see as movement. I think the term physical therapy, I think the physical part of that, or the physio part of it, is a little bit loaded because there's so many other
Mm.
factors that affect movement and how we move other than the physical side of things, right? I don't really
Mm-hmm.
make claims to do any kind of mental health therapy or anything like that. That's not my professional practice. That's not what I do. But I've noticed a lot of correlation between movement issues and mental health considerations that went. I've noticed that, if referrals are made to the right provider and some mental things get cleared up, movement improves. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's a matter of I can improve movement without even addressing movement. Sometimes it's as easy as sending a text to a different provider, someone working with them, and a few weeks later we're good to go.
Oh yeah, and that reminds me of a client that I had last year. Really awful back pain, really awful back pain. But the minute she got 8 hours of sleep and her work was suddenly less stressful, gone, totally gone. And it kind of alluded to me the power, one, of sleep, and two, just life in general and the importance of when we're taking subjectives, zoom out. Don't just ask, we're trained to ask almost a scripted subjective, right? But in that, we're typically not told to ask, how's your sleep? How's work? What is work for you? How's that going for you right now? What does day-to-day life look like for you? Because once you start to hear that and you hear, oh yeah, like I'm working probably 12-hour days, work's crazy, never get a break, can't sleep actually because I'm stressed about thinking about work. But I'll still wake up at 4 a.m. and go train and, train for an hour and a half because that sets me up really well for my 12-hour day. And then I go home and I don't sleep again. I don't eat because I don't have time. I'm like, we need to change things that is not about the gym. There's a few other things we need to work on first. And that there is their answer. So there's
Yeah,
so much more than just movement.
I completely agree. And to that point as well, I think it's so amazing when you start to unpack all those other things, just how interesting the modern American life is. Because as you were
Mm,
talking, I was like, I can think of several people that fit that description, right? Like,
mhm.
10 to 12-hour workday, never sleep, always on the go, struggles to sit down and actually eat something of substance. Like, that is really almost the American lifestyle to a T lately. And I think
Yes.
sometimes it's more about lifestyle modification than it necessarily is the exercise piece. To the point you made earlier, things like proper form get argued over and over again. Proper way to exercise or program is also debated over and over again. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's like, hey, maybe that stuff doesn't really matter as much. Maybe it's just a matter of we just need the lifestyle to support the exercise, not the exercise to support the lifestyle.
Yes. Yes. I could not have said that better. That is so true. And I think it sounds like you've experienced it. I've experienced it too growing up, in the fitness world. Before I had the knowledge that I do, it's always you look at somebody else and go, what are they doing? So I like either the way they move or I like the way they look. I like, there's something that you like about somebody that you then think if you replicate that, you will have that too. So it's constantly just doing, 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 wanting more. That we need to zoom out and, realize that there isn't a one size fits all. And the more that we do probably isn't the better for us. And like as you said before, it's understanding that lifestyle probably has more of an impact than any type of training that we do.
To that point as well, I guess I'm a little curious, Taylor. How do you
Mm.
go about approaching your own training that way? Are you the kind of person that you train a certain way and then that carries over into how you work with your clients and online patients and that sort of thing? Or how do you go about training yourself? What does your own kind of day-to-day look like?
Yeah, look, I have done it all. I started out in your classic high intensity training, F45, all of those things. Loved that. Stepped into CrossFit, loved that. Stepped into powerlifting, loved that. And then from that, I kind of created my own little hybrid type of training that I genuinely really enjoy. But I also understand that that's not everyone's cup of tea. So when I do take on a client, my question when it comes to programming and training is, what do you do and what do you enjoy? Because some people will just say, hey, I just love the bodybuilder style training, hate cardio. I'm like, sweet. I'm not going to give you EMOMs and MRAPs no matter how much I may love them. um, but in saying that too, when I have someone that comes to me is just like, hey, I just want to do something different. I'm like, yes, I know different. Leave it with me. But yeah, for myself, I'm definitely hybrid's a very umbrella, vague term. But right now here in San Diego, I'm training at the Yard Gym. The Yard Gym is actually founded back in Australia by a friend of mine, Dan, who I was training at probably 2 years ago in Sydney. Awesome gym, really cool concept in that they've split the floor into two. So there's always a rig class and a turf class going on. Rig being solely strength based, turf being your hybrid conditioning with functional movement type of class, and they're running at the same time. So you have the option to step into one or the other when you go to the gym. So it almost gives you the option for all types of training. The strength is very well written in that it's, based off of progressive overload, 12-week plans, deload weeks, very intentional with their movement. So I really enjoy that. And I've started training there since being here. And it's so nice to be in a group environment that still enforces quality training rather than just go, 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 go.
Yeah, I love that point. And it's so funny because we talked about that with Susan Cashdollar on the podcast recently as well, right? Like fitness looks a little bit different for everyone. Some people want to go out and run 10 miles. Some of us, we want to go to the gym, check our box after an hour, and then roll out and tackle the rest of our day. And there's nothing wrong with fitness looking different from one person to the next. It's all about finding a way to create a positive movement experience for yourself. You mentioned earlier, I think that, you love that concept of falling in love with movement and finding ways for people to enjoy what they do from an exercise standpoint. And I think that's absolutely essential. And to, the point of your journey as well, that might change over time. At one point, F45 might be the thing, CrossFit might be the thing. And next thing you know, you're doing a bodybuilding competition or something like that, right? Like what you find interesting might change over time. And I think that is perfectly okay and perfectly healthy. I love that you bring up the group point as well, because sometimes there's a lot of good that comes out of doing something, challenging, progressively getting harder around other people from a social standpoint. And I think that's something that's often overlooked, right? If you're someone like me who goes to the gym 5, 6 a.m., you kind of adopt that like lone wolf mentality. And it's like, sometimes it's kind of nice to just like hit a little arm farm session with the boys or something like that.
Farm session. We call that a Friday bro sesh back in Australia.
For sure, for sure. But there's something to be said about that social element as well, I
Yeah.
think. And I think that's something, from a virtual physiotherapy standpoint as well, right? Like I think virtually you can provide things a lot different than you can in person for someone. If we think about the average typical PT clinic, now there are a lot of exceptions to this out there now, but the average typical one is probably 3 to 5 patients at a time, if not more. Minimal interaction and engagement with your PT. And you're just kind of being run through one exercise after the next, with no overload, with no change, with nothing. And I don't really think that's what it's about, in my opinion. In fact, there's been patients that I've seen who have gone to other clinics here locally in Maryland that have been at PT for 2.5 hours. And I ask them what they get done, and it's like 10 exercises. It was just, they're stuck waiting for someone to move them from one to the next. So it's like just a huge time suck and time waste. And, we're not really getting as much out of it that I think we could. And I think that the online space, or, again, one of these exception clinics that way that maybe offers a more one-on-one treatment-based approach, is really the way forward for a lot of the more fit, active, performance-based population, if you will.
Yes. That is one thing. And I guess to speak back on how I was saying the system I feel fails us as physiotherapists. And that's the exact, it's a very great example in that for what we have to do with these patients, we physically cannot do that if we are managing 3 to 5 patients at one time, and we're going through what I hear some people going through 25 plus patients in one day. That to me is really bad quality patient care. And it's not to say you're a bad physio, it's saying the system is making you fail. It's not fair. And then I think the other thing that comes to mind when I speak on the system and these traditional physiotherapy clinics I remember when I was going through my interviews for America, and I was traveling all over the country, and I was stepping into these clinics, and it was 10 to 15 beds. Everyone is lying down on the bed with either an ice pack or a heat pack. And I'm thinking, where? And I said to them, where's the gym space? And they said, oh, over there. And they pointed to this little piece of turf, and that largest weight was 10 pounds. And I'm thinking, interesting. Okay, so what if you get a power lifter in here that just did their back because they just did a 400-pound squat? How are you going to rehab them? Are you going to, once they're going to graduate 10-pound weights and then you're going to send them back? Like, that is the missing piece in this traditional physiotherapy, is that we've got the acute rehab down pat, but the transition from, okay, we're pain-free, but we're definitely not where we were when we first were injured, that gap is missing in traditional PT is what I'd say. And I feel that that's where, like here in America, the cash pay PTs are doing a good job of filling that gap, and the virtual physiotherapy world too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes me think back to the conversation we had a couple months ago with Ray, right? The
Mm.
PT system being designed to be reactive in a lot of ways in an
Yep.
insurance-based model. Something has to happen for you to seek out a PT. You don't just think, oh, I should go see a PT today. You have to have something happen or get referred to even seek that out in the first place. And as you mentioned, it's very, very good in most cases at the acute management, right? Your quote
Mm.
unquote phase 1, 2 rehab. And as we were mentioning earlier, for some people, that's exercise. For some people, those 10 minutes they get on the little exercise bike at PT, that's their cardio for the week. So
Mm.
10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
is better than nothing. But if we truly want to change the system and change the culture and the overall approach to movement and health in the country, then we really have to shift our focus from being so reactive to more proactive, as we've been discussing today. We have to have ways for people to enjoy moving and stay moving so that we don't have to live in a reactionary based system for the rest of our lives. Instead, maybe, just maybe, we could prevent something from happening, or maybe we can't prevent every injury, but maybe we could make them not as bad, right? Maybe we could make it to the
Mm.
point where, hey, instead of, grade 3 type injury to something, it's only a grade 1 because we had so much strength and support around that area.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think too, in that shift, is that we need people to understand that, oh, we would like for people to think that physiotherapy is going to be a gym session. For so long, I remember back in Australia, my clinical rotations, I'd have people show up after work in their work gear and their heels. And I'm like, really? What do you think this is? Like, I'm not here for you to lay on a bed and for you to massage. If you want to get better, you got to move. And we're not moving in those heels. Or like you see guys show up after work in their jeans. And I'm like, there's this really big misconception of what PT is in this day and age. And we need to shift it from, it's not a show up, get on a bed, get a massage, and maybe do, 10 reps of a glute bridge. It's, hey, get in your gym gear. We're getting in the gym and we're getting sweaty for an hour, because it's the only way that you're going to be able to get back to doing what it was that you were once doing.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's all about finding an entry point, finding a way to, build that back up over time, progressively overload it, as you said, and then just keep people at that point, or even encourage them on their own to push past it so they never, hopefully, never come back to us for the same thing again.
Mm.
As we were talking, Taylor, I realized, you are someone who's really come to experience a lot of success, especially in the online place, literally in a whole different country. And
Mm.
I just can't help but wonder. I think about a conversation I had with a guy named Derek Millander from the Cavaliers a few years ago on the podcast, where he talked a lot about the cost of success and all the things that he kind of had to give up himself personally in order to get where he was at that point. Success is something that doesn't really come easy to people, whether it's
Mm.
from success as a patient in a physical therapy setting, success as an entrepreneur, or, success in your own fitness journey. What kind of things have you had to give up yourself on your own little personal journey to get to the point you're at right now?
Yeah, good question. And I'm very much at a point in life, and have been for the past few years, where I'm very driven to succeed in my career. So with that has come a lot of risk and a lot of change and a lot of giving up and changing a lot of things. The reason I moved to America is because I wanted more for myself that the town that I was in could offer me. So moving to America, that in itself was, I guess, step one of being an entrepreneur, as you would say. So that was giving up being close to my friends and family, stepping into a new world. And I think success doesn't come without failure first. And, and I experienced that. I came to this country for this company that promised me all these things, and that turned to absolute shit. Absolute shit. And at the time, I thought I lost everything. I truly did. I really did lose everything at the time. But from that, put me in a position where I was like, well, things can't get worse. So what is it that you really want to do? And I was like, okay, well, I always said that I'll own my own business one day. I thought it'd be in 5-10 years, but I was like, well, hell, maybe let's do it now. So I did. And through that risk, that change, that scary period of life came great success. But yeah, with that came loss of other things too. But that's life, right? It all comes down to, what do you want in life? And to achieve that, there is always something that you have to give up, or you have to compromise at least. We can't have everything. But I think the biggest thing to success is, one, knowing that failure is going to come, knowing that you have to do risky things. Success doesn't come with safety. You have to leave your safety net. You have to leave your comfort zone to be able to strive for more. And I think success comes when you don't follow the crowd. Do something different. We live in this world where we're so critical of ourselves, and we constantly go, but what if it doesn't work? What if I think this is a great idea, but what if other people don't think it's a great idea? Just do it. Go do it, is my piece of advice to anybody.
Yeah, no, I love that point. Sometimes you have to use my metaphor, you jump off a cliff and learn how to build an airplane on your way down.
Yep.
And if it doesn't work out, well, you got the rest of your life to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, you'll never regret something you have done, but you will regret what you never did. And I think so many of us, like, even to speak on just me being an Australian that packed up a life and moved to the other side of the world, I have so many people that are like, oh, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, you can.
Yeah.
Anybody can. Just go do it. They're like, oh, but I can't because of this, that, and that. And I said, yeah, that was the same as me, but I still did it. It comes down to, if you really want it, you have to sacrifice something. So where's your priorities?
Yeah, no, I love that point. And you can apply that philosophy to anything, whether it's movement related, lifestyle related, whatever. I think life is far too short to live it doing things that you don't want to do. So it's time that you just grab the bull by the horns and go out and just live the life that you want to live, plain and simple.
Yes.
If nothing else, the trendy term I keep hearing from my patients lately is they want to do things for the plot because it keeps the plot interesting. So if nothing else, write a really good plot for your own story, I guess.
Just do it for the plot, honestly. I hear that all the time. Sometimes you're in a situation, but you do it for the plot.
Outside of doing things for the plot, do you have any other big takeaways or anything that we might have missed in our conversation today, Tayla?
Oh, look, I think we covered a lot of great talking points, shifting the mentality of what physical therapy is, the importance of movement as a whole, very well beyond aesthetics and the look of it all. And getting back to the foundation and things. Don't get caught up in the trendy, the cool things. And remember that while people are doing cool and trendy things, they're also doing the basic stuff too. And that's where you should start.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I know you were mentioning earlier that you share a lot of that stuff online. So for people who are interested, where can they find you on Instagram or online, or where can they go to learn more about Athletic Rebuild?
Yeah, so my Instagram is at Tayla Cannon Physio. Now, if you're an American listening to me, you're probably thinking my name is Taylor. It's Taylor, and it's spelled the way it sounds. Tayla. But otherwise, I've got my website too, athleticrebuild.net, where you can get all the info there too.
Awesome. We'll link to those in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch those, you can just click there. Tayla, I really
Perfect.
appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for everything.
No, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.